and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Lowries, and of course, the Good Girl Confessional podcast is proudly brought to us by WB40, Women Beyond 40, a platform for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond. You can check us out at WB40.com. Today in the confessional, I'll be chatting with Lise Carlaw and Sarah Wills, also known as Those Two Girls. Lise and Sarah created the 40 Edit, and they have their podcast, Those Two Girls 40. But today they'll be chatting about their new book, 40 Favours the Brave. These two girls left breakfast radio to build their own platform, their own podcast, which is fabulous. Please welcome to the confessional, Lise Carlaw and Sarah Wills. Hello, ladies. How are you? Welcome to the confessional.
Thank you very much for having us.
It's good to be here.
It feels really weird, actually, being on the other side.
I was going to ask you that. It must be strange, actually, because obviously you're both incredible podcasters, so it must be strange sitting on the other side of that.
Yeah, we might not be great guests. We're about to find out, because it certainly does feel really strange not being in control of the conversation. But you're a pro as well, so over to you.
And you know, sometimes when we would interview people and they're like, can you just send us the questions you'll be asking? And we're like, no, we cannot send the questions off the cuff. And now I get why people want the questions.
I promise to be gentle with you here in the confessional, ladies. Don't worry about that. First of all, I love that you two are friends and that you have this amazing sisterhood, because over here at WB40 we're all about the sisterhood. So I guess I wanted to start with that, and I know today we'll be talking about your brand new book, which is exciting, but I wanted to start with the friendship and how you both came together to basically start Those Two Girls.
Do you want to take this, or do you want...
Oh, darling.
Shall we just talk over each other how we usually do?
Always.
Okay, great. So, no, you're right. There is nothing that we do together as Those Two Girls, as Lise and Sarah, that doesn't come from the friendship, because none of this was expected. None of this was calculated. The story of how we met is a little bit daggy.
We were mummy bloggers.
No, I don't think we were ever mummy bloggers. We were both pregnant with our second children at a time where we were bored in our respective jobs and just tailing out the end of our maternity sort of leave. I don't even know what point it was. And we were both writing stuff on the internet.
Yeah.
Really is the gist of it. And I came across Sarah's musings and her funny stories, little anecdotes. This was all just on Facebook. These were Facebook status updates. Most of it was really as simple as that.
Well, I had a blog. You didn't have a blog. Yours was all on Facebook, but I did. And but it was through mutual friends, and I think people who maybe followed us both.
That's right.
Who had said to us separately, oh God, I think you'd really enjoy Lise Carlaw's page if you don't already follow her. And people were saying the same thing to Lise. So we started following each other, and then the pennies dropped that we were pregnant with our second kids. We were due days apart, and we just kind of started this online messaging friendship. And when our youngest kids, who are now 8, were 4 months old, we had a date. Lise came to my house, which weirdly enough was like a kilometre down the road from hers. We lived so close. We should have been at so many life events together in our 20s, really. Like, we were both invited to the same wedding, but Lise couldn't come. But I ended up sitting at the table with her now husband. Like, weird connectivity, sliding doors. But it wasn't until we were essentially 33, 34 that we actually met in person. And I mean, without a doubt, I say this openly, meeting Lise changed my life.
I think we both realised...
In a good way.
I hope so. I think we both realised that at the time, it was our early, mid-30s, we thought that we'd rounded out our friendship baskets. You know, you have your heritage friendships from high school or primary school, if you're lucky. You have your university friends. You have your new mum friends. And we were firmly in that place in our lives of raising very young families. And then a woman walks into your life unexpectedly, and it is like fireworks. It is like that meeting of the minds where we had so much in common, down to both our husbands' names start with D. Our mother-in-law's names are Anne without an E. Born in the same year, married in the same year.
Same fertility issue, same fertility doctor who was out an hour away from Brisbane, you know.
Everything was so similar, and yet Sarah and I are so different, you know, when you pick it apart, we're very different people, but with very, very similar foundations and values. So we met, and very quickly, we sort of pieced together our professional backgrounds and histories and realised that there was a lot of complementary skills, and
I think we cracked something open inside each other, honestly. I think we cracked open unrequited dreams.
Oh, Sarah.
And I think we sort of fulfilled that in each other.
Creative dreams that just hadn't quite
Panned
come
out.
to fruition or panned out, because sometimes things don't. That's how we met, Sandy.
Wow. Well, I am loving this love story, because quite often with many women that I meet who have these extraordinary friendships, it is a love story. I love that with you two. I mean, how poetic, Sarah. Seriously, you cracked something open in one another. I absolutely love that. And what's happened since then, and I always say this, is when women collaborate, magic happens, and it just does. And for you two, magic has certainly happened. You've made magic happen. So congratulations on everything that the two of you have achieved together creatively. So was it, obviously it wasn't then a tough decision to jump in and say, we're going to start a podcast. So what came first? Because you've got the 40 edit, you've got the 40 podcast, you've got it all going on, ladies.
Well, I mean, I think we have to go back even further. And Lise had a daydream that we were standing in front of a crowd holding microphones.
That's no word of a lie.
That was in 2015. No, it was 2014.
And I am the least likely person to have daydreams. I'm quite a grounded person. My feet are firmly on the ground. I don't really allow myself to go too woo-woo or dreamy. And yet it was clear as day. I remember talking to you, Sarah. I was walking, pacing my backyard, thinking, am I actually going to say this out loud? And I just said to her, I can see it in my mind's eye. I was like doing the dishes or doing God knows what at home. And there it was. I don't know what it means, but we're standing side by side with microphones in our hand. And I thought, she's either going to ditch me as a friend early in this relationship.
Oh, no, I was like, oh, this sounds legitimate. Yes.
And that's what
Absolutely.
she said. She said, yes, okay, let's do that then, as if it was a perfectly normal thing to be proposing. And in effect, that was the first thing we did without a second thought as to how to execute that, how that would play out, what people would think.
Well, we were very much just like, great, we'll be a female MC duo. None of those exist. There are lots of male duos. And in Brisbane at the time, events were emceed by wonderfully polished newsreaders or former sports stars or people with a profile. So
Radio
I do kind of
hosts.
think, what the hell were we thinking? Just these suburban mothers with young children that we could throw our hats in the ring. But then I think that's the bravery of women together, because having both of us in each other's corner and vice versa meant that it didn't even seem scary.
Well, there was a level of gumption that came out of nowhere for me. I would never have had the courage to put myself out there the way we did without Sarah by my side. And it just made so much sense to us at the time. It was so clear, of course, this is what we were going to do. And before we knew it, I had seen on social media that a popular event venue here in Brisbane was hosting the Bachelor finale event. So they had...
it was a live broadcast of the finale in conjunction with Channel 10.
Yeah, they'd landed all those very important TV rights. And I said to Sarah,
this was back when The Bachelor was huge.
Yeah, people were writing a lot.
People were still watching it.
Yes, it wasn't like now because we don't even watch it now. Yeah. But I just said to Sarah, what if we were to call this venue and see if they've locked down hosts? Because someone's going to have to moderate the night. And that was another big
green
light. We made the phone call. We were pacing around in your backyard this time, shaking in our boots. I remember just feeling so nervous going, what am I going to say when someone answers this phone? It was like making a phone call when you're a teenager to a boy.
Hey, we've got no experience, no profile. We just really like The Bachelor. Would you like us as MCs? And weirdly enough, the woman who answered had just come out of a meeting discussing that very thing. And she was like, yeah, I'll give you a go. No problem. Of course, we were like, we'll do it for free. That event was great. And there were 200 women in the room. And then from there, I guess word just got out. And so we started emceeing events. Then we were kind of getting a bit bored with the events we were going to. So thought, why don't we just put on events that we would want to go to? And they became just sellouts, like 500 tickets would sell out in 2.5 hours. You know, it was massive. And then from there, we got a message in our Facebook DMs of all things from the then head of the Hit Radio Network, who said, how would you girls feel about your own weekend breakfast radio show? And so, you know, we weren't seeking that. We never thought radio was in our future. And then, so we did that. Then the next year it became a national early breakfast radio show. Then a Gold Coast breakfast show got tacked onto that. And then we sort of, you know, threw radio in the bin and do the podcasts.
And the podcast is incredible. I love that you didn't actually set out to be in radio, because really you both were so brilliant at it as you are on the podcast. You've both got incredible voices for radios, but you're both beautifully, you know, you're both gorgeous women as well. So I don't mean to say that you've just got voices for radio, because you're both stunning, but you just have a natural way of being, I think, when you were doing radio and now on your podcast. And the way that you bounce off each other is just beautiful. So I love that. And I'm sure that's what resonates with women. So I'm loving that you've taken on, I mean, everything that we do over here is women beyond 40, so 40, 50, 60 and beyond. I love that you girls are advocates for women in this 40-year-old space, because quite often, as we know, there's not a great deal of representation for women in this space. You two, I think, have done something that, you know, really resonates with women. So what are your listeners? What's the feedback that you get from women who are heading for 40 or who are in their 40s?
I think plain and simply the listeners are us. And that's what we set out to do, was create content and deliver important information that we needed to hear entering this decade and entering this season of our lives. So I think the feedback we get is, no word of a lie, the reactions that Sarah and I have after interviewing a guest. So we'll have messages come through like, I really needed to hear that from Susie Porter. I needed to hear that she lied about her age for a while and that now she realises how ridiculous that is and that she refuses to do that again. Or all the aha moments that Sarah and I have as hosts of the show is being reflected back to us in our audience.
Well, and I think in respect to 40, that was created there was no commercial reason behind starting 40. It wasn't like, let's start a podcast and make a lot of money. It was genuinely We have a lot of questions about this decade. Nobody is talking about it. So what if we're the ones that start the conversation and selfishly try and find out the answers to the questions that we have about entering our 40s? And because Lise and I are 41, we're still at the whippersnapper end of this decade. So as Lise said, it is our reactions are very genuine. The knowledge that we garner and savor there's nothing forced about it. So I think because it comes from an actual place of friendship between Lise and me, and us being vulnerable about our questions and epiphanies that we had at this point in life, it means that women can relate. And a lot of the feedback we receive is from ladies saying, you just feel like our friends. You just feel like we're listening in on a coffee that you two are having with another woman we all look up to. So, and that's always been the nicest feedback to hear, I think.
Yeah, I think that that's really beautiful. And I think that your style very much is like that you feel like you're in the room. And that's what I love about listening to your podcast. I'm at the other, probably heading on the other end of that spectrum. I'm in my 50s now, ladies. And so it's fascinating. And I think you're right. So, I find myself now being asked to talk about ageism and being asked to talk about menopause all the time. And those things are really massively important for women in their 50s. But I do think life really changed for me, and I think for a lot of women, when I hit 40. So 40 sort of becomes this, I think, this time of awakening. Who am I? And we really are juggling a lot. And I know you girls would find that as well. You're juggling careers. You're juggling young families, because you've still got young families. How do you juggle this extraordinary sort of business that you have created with family life?
I think it's been an absolute bender of a learning curve for us. At first, we were spending every waking moment together or on the phone. It didn't matter if it was a Wednesday night or a Saturday morning. We were talking about business because we were so excited and so passionate about our futures together in this space. I think now, in terms of like how do we manage all the different components of our lives, we've had to learn to put boundaries in place. And honestly, that has been with the help and advice from our 40 guests. And I say that with no lie. It is the absolute truth. We were taught by women like Kemi Nekvapil, who has been a really, really popular guest on the show, that you need to put boundaries in place in order to thrive, because it
doesn't make you a nasty or a bad person to say, no, I can't do that.
We were just running ourselves into the ground, and we weren't identifying what makes us happy, what makes us do better work. We were just doing everything like mad women. So we've just learned to slow down, to breathe a little, to delegate, and to protect our family lives and our work lives, and just be a little bit more moderate in our approach, I would say.
Well, I applaud you for that, because I think that's something that is extremely difficult for most women, is to set boundaries. Because why do you think that is, by the way? Why do you think women struggle with this setting of boundaries?
I think we've been fed a lie and a fallacy that we should be able to multitask, and that we're good at multitasking, and that we can do it all. That is something that I wish I'd never known about being female, because in my 20s and 30s, probably more so my 30s, I wore that as a badge of honour, that I could have a tidy house, continue in my career, have a great relationship with my husband, have fun with my friends. And it's a lie. At least it is as a 40-year-old woman. I can't do all those things anymore. So I think it's the greatest disservice to believe that the women you listen to, or the women you watch, or the woman next door is doing everything beautifully, because it's just untrue. I don't know anyone, or maybe I should rephrase that and say, none of my real friends with which we share honest information would ever try and say that she's nailing everything. I just don't think it's possible.
No. Well, I think that's why 39 was my epiphany year of just because I had been doing everything, you know, my private, my family relationship, my husband works away a lot, the 2 kids, we were working early mornings, we were working away from home in another city. And, you know, up until that point when people would say to me, I don't know how you do it, I would kind of wear that as like a badge of pride and really like I was crumbling inside. And so 39 was the year that I kind of shook everything up and started with saying no to some things so I could say yes to other things and letting people know that I wasn't going to, you know, I was going to be taking a new approach to how I manage day-to-day life because it's really hard and you've got to put your hand up and say, actually, despite what you may think, I'm actually not as capable or I don't want to be as capable.
Oh, and just getting really honest about what help you get.
Yeah.
And because it has such a knock-on effect. You know, you tell one friend, I think the other day my sister had said to me, she's a couple of years older than I am, so she's 44 now, and she is one of the most organised and capable women I know. And I was on the phone to her and she said to me, she had like a meltdown. She's like, I am done. I am done with groceries. I am done with cooking dinner. I can't do it anymore. I've pretended that I can do it. I want to serve up healthy meals and I've done it for 20 years and now I'm not doing it. And she said, and I said, well, what the hell are you actually going to do? Though, like, you know, what's your solution here? And she just said, I'm going to do online groceries direct to the boot. I don't get out of my car. I'm ordering those sort of meal service things where you cook it yourself, but the ingredients are delivered. She's like, I'm going to budget accordingly because I cannot waste any more of my weekends on this kind of stuff. I am done.
And I think it's ditching that idea that you're a failure as a woman because you're perhaps not
doing it the way your mother did it.
Your meal plans. Or maybe you are. Maybe that's what brings you calm for the week. Or feeling guilty that you get a cleaner, like just, or that you might get someone in to, I don't know, wash the dog on the weekend because you don't have time to do it. I just think we need to cut ourselves a bit of slack.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I was recently speaking to Mia Northrop, who is part of the Life Hacks team, Life Admin Hacks, and they've brought out a book on that. I think, you know, really the message that she brings to the world, and which I 100% agree with, is that as women, you're right, we've got to cut ourselves some slack and stop pretending that we can divide our time evenly and equally between a million different, you know, pressing things that go on in our life. We can. We can put our time between it, but can we do it successfully? And I don't think so.
Yeah. And I think you've really got to take a good, long, hard look at yourself and what you are like in the problem there as well. Like I will throw myself under the bus here and say that I was terrible with that, what do they call it, revenge bedtime procrastination. You know, where like the only time of day you get truly to yourself is at night when kids are in bed. So you stay up late on your phone, scrolling mindlessly or watching something on Netflix. And then when you get up in the morning, you're still tired. You haven't had a great night's sleep. And none of that contributes to making good decisions, being, you know, fully present for people because you just, you know, well, I can't speak for anybody else, but so for me recently, it's been going to bed much earlier, getting up earlier, having an hour of peace and calm in my day before the kids wake up, and that becomes my time. So I think it's really kind of having an objective look at you can't blame everything on everyone else. You've got to look at how you can help yourself.
I think those epiphanies, at least for Sarah and I, have only revealed themselves in our 40s.
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
If only I had known, instead of being scared of turning 40 and, you know, terrified of that looming milestone birthday, if someone had said to me, which a lot of people have now because of the podcast, if someone had have said to me, the best is yet to come, you are going to step in to exactly what you like doing. You're going to step into exactly who you are. You're going to make no apologies for being the way you are, whether it's good, bad or ugly. You're going to tell people exactly how it goes for you, and they can come along for the ride or they don't. If only someone had have said that to me, I would have been so stoked to enter these years. So I think we just own it more at this age, I think.
Oh, and I think you're absolutely going to love when you hit the next decade then, because in your 50s, these are the years where we just have less fucks to give. So because really, I mean, you just come into your own power. But for me at 41, I became suddenly single and divorced after 18 years with my ex-husband, and it was such a shake-up in my world, and it shook me to the core. But what it did make me do was reevaluate my life, because I had been that person striving to be the perfect wife and the perfect mum and the perfect friend and the perfect daughter and all of the perfects which don't exist, and we all know that they don't exist. It didn't stop me from trying. And I think what was really fascinating, though, that in my 40s, that I was able to say, well, actually, what brings joy to my life? And at that point, I was a blogger, I was writing, I was doing a whole lot of things. I think after that, I jumped in and started writing a blog. It was not a mummy blog. It was definitely not. It was about sex, dating and relationships in my 40s, which no one at that time really was talking about. And I find that women are brilliant, and I'm saying this to you girls because I think what you're doing is amazing. Women are brilliant, as you say. If you can't find what it is that you need or what you're looking for, you create it yourself, or lots of women do. And I think that that's amazing. Probably one of the great things that you girls have done, though, is you've created a community of women, so women who are hitting their 40s who don't feel like they're in this on their own.
I mean, that would be the dream, and I think it is. I think that's what we get so much out of, is engaging with our listeners, whether that be on social media or on the radio shows that we were doing or what have you, and just realising, because I suppose when you're in a studio, you forget. We genuinely forget that there are thousands of people listening. We just don't clock it at all. So then when you put an episode out and you realise that people are listening and paying attention, and I think we've received messages from women younger than 40 thanking us for shining the light on how great it's going to be for them. And that's the work that we do. That's why we do it. It's to have people have those epiphanies themselves. So I don't know. Sometimes I don't know if it feels like a community as such, but I think that there's a lot of us out there.
I think you'd be surprised. I know that when I launched WB40 Magazine, and I did so because I couldn't find a magazine that I wanted to read that was talking to me about the things that I really wanted to hear. And I created it. People were reaching out to me on so many things, but what they reached out, and several times this happened. Have you listened to the 40 podcast? Because I was already doing the Good Girl Confessional podcast. So I think you'd be surprised that in that way it is a community, that people were talking about you and are talking about you to other women. So in that way, I feel like in the very sense of the word, that's community, right?
Yeah.
I suppose so. Yeah.
I suppose we're always a little bit in denial about that, because we don't do it for the glory of it. It's a hard one to answer. I don't know why we sit so uncomfortably with that in a way.
Because it still just feels like us as two mates talking. It just
feels like us, and
it's
you
nice
guys,
if it helps some people or they listen, but we don't actually think of it as
and the listeners feel like us. We're all on the same level playing field. And I suppose we can probably draw it back, Sarah, to when we were doing breakfast radio, Sandy, on the Gold Coast. And it was the first time, I suppose, we'd seen ourselves on the sides of buses and on billboards. And hand on heart, Sarah and I mean, it was thrilling for all of a day, and then really quickly we realised that that just was not our currency. Like it was exciting, but we didn't carry that with us. We actually didn't care about being
because
on
we were
any of
so
that.
harried and frazzled doing that job. None of that held any allure at all.
But then when we'd sit down in the 40 studio, that was our happy place. So we were like, we do not need the glory and the recognition that way. It is so nice to be recognised for good work.
Yeah.
So we will take that all day, every day. But to just be held up on billboards does not float our boat. I mean, if someone wants to put us up on a billboard,
someone wants to put a book on a billboard.
If they want to put
our
book
on a billboard, but...
we'll do that. We'll do that. But yeah, no, that's lovely.
Oh, I love that. Yes, and speaking about books, let's talk about yours. I'm in love with the title of this book, 40 Favours the Brave. So how did the book come about, girls?
Oh, well... I mean, the book was another great big surprise. So we launched 40 in October 2020, and by December, our manager called us and said, hey, I've just had calls from some publishing houses that are keen for you to think about turning 40 into a book. And we thought, well, it's only been out for 2 months. Like, what? Are you sure? Because people had said to us in the past, you know, if ever you want to write a book, then we can cut a deal. And
we're like,
Lise
no,
and I
thanks.
said, we have absolutely nothing to say. Like, no, there's nothing cringier than someone who's just been like thrown a book to write and given a bit of money and there's just no substance to it. So, but when this discussion happened, Lise and I were like, oh, well, maybe there's something there. It's not really about us. It's about 40 and turning 40 and the women we've interviewed. And we thought we'd just kind of be pulling the transcripts of the podcasts and tying it up in a nice little scripted book. And the publisher who we decided to go with in the end was like, oh, no, we're going to want some more of you both in there as well. And I think we tried to really talk them out of that. But no, in the end, it's become sort of 80,000 words of Lise and my feelings and lessons around turning 40 and life beforehand, interspersed with wisdom from not only women that we interviewed on the podcast up until, you know, the draft was due in, but also women in our lives, family, friends, on the big questions, like how do you feel when you look in the mirror?
That felt like the really important work. I mean, writing about our own stories cracked us wide open as again.
Yeah. I mean, don't get there's serious stuff in there. There's a lot of silly, frivolous stuff in there. You know,
there's a lot of very
fun,
entertaining stories in there, but there
some
are
deeply
some
personal things.
There's some really vulnerable and deeply personal pieces in there. But I think that the most important part of that book writing process for me was being able to talk to our close friends and women in our everyday lives, mums at school, mums at sport, sisters, cousins,
our own mothers about their 40s.
And having really, really honest conversations about how they felt about certain parts of being 40. And they were just exquisite in their responses. And the book just, to us, feels like a real ode to any woman stepping into this decade, or even the women younger and the women older. Because if you're older, you'll probably look back and nod and go, okay, they're here. I remember that fondly, or I remember that challenge. And if they're younger, there's something for them, you know, other women who have gone before to say, hey, this is ahead for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been
I think that's what we
process.
kind of hope for it. We hope that it's like just the go-to 40th birthday present.
That'd be nice.
That's our, I think, ultimate is just, oh, you know, Cindy, she's turning 40. I know what I'm going to get her. 40 Favours the Brave. There you go. Do with it what you will.
Oh, look, I love that. I love that. I love it because, you know, a lot of women in their 50s, you know, buy subscriptions to our mag for their other friends in their 50s because it is that. And I think what's really lovely is, as you say, for women to be able to shine a light for younger women to come through. If I had have known, you know, when I turned 41, what my life was going to be, oh, how different, you know, things would have turned out, I'm sure. But I do...
Oh, what would you tell yourself? What would you tell yourself then that you know now?
I think not to wait as long as I did to do certain things in my life and to really honour myself in relationships. I think that's the big one that I learnt. And I probably, as you say, you figure things out when you hit your 40s. I figured out a lot of those things. And it was things like, honouring myself that, you know, as a woman in a relationship, it would have been 100% okay for me to start doing radical things for myself. And when I say radical things, I've shaken up my career. I've done lots of different things, but I waited to do those things. I think in hindsight, absolutely, I would have done those things. I would have been braver. And I think in terms of exactly what you girls were talking about in setting boundaries, I wish I had known that earlier in my life.
Yeah. And the thing is, we've always said, and the same applies for our podcast, our book, what have you, is that we are not experts in anything. Our podcast, our questions to our guests, what we've written down in this book is just our experience. But I don't know about you, growing up, Dolly Doctor, for me, was greater than any article they can print. They, you know, for me it was, let me read what someone else is going through. Let me have a little bit of a fly on the wall understanding of what another girl is going through. So we're not sitting here as menopause experts, as perimenopause, or as aging experts. We're just telling you the stories of what we've gone through, what we think, what we're experiencing. And if people can relate to that, then great. I think that's the very best we can do.
I was never allowed to read Dolly Doctor.
Oh, well, God, you missed out, girlie.
Yeah. I mean, I would try. I would go to friends' places and I would rip open that kind of sealed section and read about someone being like, "Dear Dolly Doctor, I've got green discharge from my nipples." And it's only in hindsight that you're like, wow, that publishing process you would have sorted out that problem long before this came to print.
But the fact is that you read on with absolute either terror or awe. Both emotions are worthy and important. So, you know, some people might read some of our stories, Sarah, and be absolutely horrified.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it.
I can't
for
wait.
a second.
Ladies, they'll be reading some of your stories and feel very comforted that they are not the only people who are having experiences and feelings, right? I think I'm laughing to myself when you were talking about Dolly Doctor, because when you girls were reading Dolly, I was probably reading Cosmo and Cleo. And the sealed section in those magazines was probably a little bit more exciting. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
But I do remember Dolly was certainly out even when I was a teenager. So, yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? But I think you're right. I think it is in the telling of our stories, people feel less alone. Are you finding that? What's the initial reaction to the book?
Well, we are still very much in the pre-order stage of the publishing process, which basically means that the book hits physical shelves, physical bookstores on the 29th of March. But it became available to pre-order. When was that, Sarah? I cover end of February.
Yeah,
it's only been a couple of
weeks.
weeks. So basically, no one has a copy of this book in their hands yet.
And the people who have are biased. So we don't know, Santa, we don't know.
But in the next few weeks, a lot of, all like media types and all of that will start getting them. Whether they read it or not is a whole other story.
We became mates with Sally Hepworth, who's a best-selling Aussie author, through 40 and through our interactions, and she very kindly, she's actually the one person who's read the book.
Yes.
She reviewed it, and she said she would agree to do the cover quote for it, which is, turns out in publishing, quite a big deal. To like who you get on your cover. And she said it was like a weekend away with your best girlfriends, and basically that the book makes you excited about turning 40. So if Sally's sentiment is what's shared by all readers, then I think Lise and I can be very proud about what we've put out there.
I agree, because I adore Sally, and Sally's been on this podcast. And I was, again, when you were talking about seeing your faces up on buses, the lovely Sally, once had an 8-story, billboard up in Times Square in New York City, and she said the same sort of sentiment. I couldn't believe it when they rang me, when they took a photo and they showed me. But I agree. If Sally Hepworth says that your book's kick-ass, then I 100% believe that it will be kick-ass.
And we don't even know where she actually physically lives, so we can't threaten her either. Like, she's actually said it out of the goodness of her heart because hopefully she means every word. But yeah, we were stoked when that came through.
Yeah, she's amazing, and she's not only is she an amazing author, but she's also an amazing advocate for other women. So that's fantastic that she's read your book, loving it. So I guess
bless her. She's going over to New York or to America for her book tour. And I was messaging her last night and I said, oh, my God, the book tour sounds amazing, but also you'll get to go shopping in Anthropology, which is just this like American chain store that I love looking at and doesn't bloody post to Australia. And God bless that woman's socks. She said, do you want me to shop for anything in there for you when I'm there?
You can't be one of those people, Sarah. They're the people who ask people.
I'm not going to ask her to do that.
To bring things back from overseas are the worst kind of people. Sorry.
I'm not going to. But the fact that she offered, I'm not going to waste her time on an American tour.
She had her fingers and toes crossed going, I'm not going to get them anyway, even if she does bloody ask.
Oh, that is gorgeous. And by the way, one of my favourite online stores to just browse, because I recently saw an emerald green dress on there that I was like, I want it so bad.
I know. Why don't we have one of those in Australia yet? I think it would go off.
I don't understand why they don't, really, especially during this online revolution that's happened.
Yeah.
Over the last couple of years. It seems crazy. One question I really wanted to ask you, ladies, because I'm super excited and looking forward to reading your book, is what advice would you give for anybody listening who is yet to turn 40? What hard-won wisdom would you be sharing with them? I'll go with you first, Sarah.
My favourite piece of advice that helped me and changed me when I heard it actually came from Kemi Nekvapil, who Lise mentioned earlier. And it was her quote, basically I'll paraphrase it, but what I don't want on my gravestone is she was nice, she was liked. Like, there's got to be more to you than being nice. Nice essentially means you put up with a lot of stuff. You put up with people before yourself. It's about putting yourself to the front of the line sometimes and looking at what's around you and saying, this works for me, this doesn't, and not being afraid that some people's noses might be put out of joint. I think that piece of advice has helped me the most because I lived a lot of my 20s and 30s just really, really conscious of being liked and being that, that fun, likable girl to be around, which I hope I still am a fun, likable woman. But maybe that's where the whole boundaries conversation comes from as well, is that it's only when you realise you don't have to do what everybody else wants you to do that you can actually sort of set some structure and set some new goals in your life, I think.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you, Lise?
I would say there was something that Justine Cullen, who's a former magazine editor, she said to us when we sat down with her, she said, you're allowed to change your dreams. So she was referring specifically to how hard she had worked towards this one dream of hers, which was to become the editor of whichever glossy magazine she ended up editing. And then when she got there, at a certain point in her life, she realised that it just didn't quite make her happy the way she thought it would, because her life had changed and she had changed. So I think for me, that piece of advice that I'm taking with me is that we're allowed to change. We're not 42-year-old Lise is not who 32-year-old Lise was, and that's perfectly fine. And I'm allowed to change my mind, and I'm allowed to change the trajectory of my life. Just because I said 10 or 5 years ago, well, this is what I want to do, if I change my mind, who cares if people think I'm frivolous? There's such freedom and liberation in accepting the fact that we're evolving all the time. Same in our relationships or friendships or marriages, that we're not the people who we're with are changing as well, and to just be a little bit more fluid and give ourselves permission to relax a bit.
You're allowed to recalibrate.
You're allowed to do that. Nobody else is making the rules. I think that's the biggest piece of advice.
Bravo, ladies, because I think 100% if you're not evolving from 22 to 52, 62, whatever it may be, perhaps that's a time to be looking really, taking a long, hard look at yourself and asking yourself, well, why am I not evolving? Because I guarantee the rest of the world and people around you will be. I think that's such magical, beautiful advice from both of you. I remember my mother saying to me, my mum was a fierce little disabled feminist, and she said to me, it's not your business what other people think about you. So, stop worrying about the rest of the bloody world. Pull your socks up and get out there and just worry about yourself. I think, and she didn't mean that in a selfish way, not to care about other people, obviously. But I think it's a truism that it is not our business what others think of us. So in us evolving, changing our dreams, making space for ourselves, delegating to other people and not feeling ashamed of it. It is, if other people have issues with who we are, that's really not on us. We can't take that on board.
Yeah, I think that's what I tell my kids now. I'm like, nobody's actually watching you. Nobody actually cares. Nobody is that concerned with what you are doing in this specific moment. Like, really, we're all so scared that everybody's watching our every move, and you just realise we're too busy. Everyone's too busy with their own stuff to be critiquing you. And if they are, they're just not your people. You've got to move on.
But then when you're younger, you are watching everybody because you're comparing yourself to them. So I think it's all well and good to say that, but until you live a little bit and realise that, what's that famous saying, comparison is the thief of joy? Like, that's what it kind of...
But I think that's the joy of coming into our 40s and beyond, is getting to these realizations. These are things that, again, as a younger woman, I wish someone would have told me, you wait for the wisdom that you're going to have when you're 41, let alone 51. That's the exciting stuff. We're focusing so much on how we're going to look when we're 45 and how we're going to be in our careers, when really the guts of it is you wait what you're going to know about yourself and the world. Like, that's so exciting to me. And the work that we've done in the book and in our podcast is just a weekly reminder that these are the best years of our lives.
I feel more like myself now than ever before.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, just so settled and kind of calm in who I am and what I look like and what I'm doing and who I'm hanging with, and it's lovely.
I love that. And I do remember, because, I'm a bit older than you girls, but I do remember 41 was probably, I felt sexier than I'd ever felt before in my life. I did go through a massive sexual revolution as well, I guess, of really knowing who I was, what I wanted, who I wanted to be, with all of those things. So I do think that comes from a place of wisdom in terms of liking yourself, learning to love yourself. I think before my 40s, you hear this cliche all the time, you must love yourself before you can love others. And I used to just think, oh, that's so cringy, because I didn't really understand what it meant. I hit my 40s, and then you do the work and you realise, oh yeah, actually, if I can't.
But also, Sandy, if you were with your ex-husband for 18 years, I mean, you were a baby. You were like a child, a child bride by modern standards. Like, how it would have only been in your 40s that you would have been able to see yourself as an independent unit, because your formative decades as an adult, your identity was so tied up in another person.
100% true. And that's why I'm saying now, I wish I'd known earlier that, you can stand alone from a relationship, that you are, you're not joined at the hip with someone just because you happen to love them or share children with them.
It's interesting you say that you felt sexiest at 41, because without giving too much away, in the book, both Sarah and I interview our mothers, and which was just so enlightening and so cathartic and so important for us to do. And one of Mum's answers really mirrors yours. She said that when she was 40, she felt beautiful and she felt sexy and she felt those things. And when I asked her why, she said, well, because it was finally a time in my life where you girls, you and your sister, were old enough to do things for yourselves, and I had a bit more space and I had more time to have long showers and put on nice clothes. And I thought, it's so true at a very, very simplistic and basic level. This whole idea that you're hot when you're young, that's kind of lost on the youth, because that's a very small window. Then you enter your 30s, and if you decide to have a family, I feel that your really beautiful, youthful, hot years are sort of just engulfed in fatigue and everyone else but yourself. So I think coming out, emerging from those young child-rearing years in your 40s, if that's the way your life has gone, that you do have more time to look around and assess things and pay attention to yourself and your partner if that's your situation. So, yeah, I find that interesting that you've had the same experience as Mum did.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely, all of those things, but it is also too the gaining of wisdom, if you like, the understanding yourself more. And with that understanding yourself more does come those benefits of setting boundaries, of carving out time for yourself to do the things that really interest you and that you want to do. I do think it's really fascinating, though, that we are so different than our mothers were at the same age. Like, I find that fascinating. Certainly. They seemed so much older. Some mothers, seemed so much older. And I look back and I think, why do you think we've changed? Why do you think women in this age demographic are far more dynamic than perhaps generations previously?
Because we know so much more. I think we've just have this wealth of information at our fingertips now, and people are having these conversations. I think back in our mothers' days, you didn't really talk about this. It was this not secret women's business, but you didn't really talk to your friend about your mood swings if you were going through hormonal stuff, or you certainly didn't. I mean,
Sarah, I think they probably did, but there wasn't a collective
not
around
a collective attitude shift the way we're experiencing it. And we share so much.
And there's
now.
also, like, one of the things I interviewed with my mum was kind of on this very, very subject. And for her, particularly with appearances, like, they didn't have options. They didn't have the options that we do now. I feel like there are so many obsessive discussions about what's happening with our faces, whereas the fact is our mothers just had oil of Ulan and genetics, so there was no, like, my mum never had a facial, has never had a facial in her life. Manicures weren't a thing. Going to the hairdresser wasn't a thing. Like, these were girls' weekends were not a thing. There were not, cafe culture was not a thing. It was a family unit was what bound you together and how you socialized with other people. And I think I'm not saying they certainly weren't living like in the dark ages by any stretch, because that, our generation of mothers were still the ones that were in the, the revolutionary 70s and 80s and getting women back into the workforce. And they're the ones that got us maternity leave and all that. That's that generation. But
also you think of how many women we're exposed to every single day through our phone screens. You can be comparing yourself or getting insight into how a woman across the world is living her life as a 43-year-old woman, because we have access to it. Our mothers just had their colleagues, if they were working women back then, or their sisters or their mothers to turn to. We have this like universe at our fingertips, and it goes both ways. It can be very problematic to have that much choice and that much information, but it can also be really liberating. And I don't know where I sit. It depends on the day. It depends when you get me. Sometimes I don't want to see what other women are doing. Other times I learn so much from seeing what other women are doing. So I think it's a double-edged sword, and we're really the first generation to go through having access to as much as we do. Our mothers didn't have to deal with it, you're right.
But my mother also feels sorry for our generation.
As does mine.
That's the interesting thing, that also comes out in the book is that both of them feel like our age group just has it so tough that in being told we could do everything or anything meant that we ended up doing anything and everything.
I think Mum had said, she had said to me,
it was a simpler time for them.
It was simpler, and you consider so many different things in order to make a decision. And she didn't say it disrespectfully, but she said it in the way that I'm spending so much more energy considering different sides of the arguments or considering my options, where she really only had the one option or two. I think sometimes they think we waste our time with a lot of stuff.
I think so. And when they say it was like when Mum was like, it was a simpler time, like you kids just stayed at home until you went to school. There was no working, there was no daycare, there was none of that juggle. It was just kind of expected that would be the way it worked out. So, great. But I look at that and think, oh, God, that would have been a bit boring.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because my mum, was a bit of a rebel. She protested for women's rights. She was arrested. Several times for fighting, to bring the boys home from Vietnam, and then for fighting for women's rights. So I feel like she was a pioneer, and I owe her so much. But even she felt, she's no longer with us, but she felt even that we had too many choices now. And she felt so she was grateful for the fact that she had sort of burned this trail for younger women coming behind her to have the choices that we did. We could choose to work. We could choose what careers we wanted. Really, we're the first generation to have had, an income, be earning money through our entire lives, and to have some say in that. And I think, look, we've still got a long way to go in terms of equality, and we all know it. But she did even then, even though she fought for those rights, then really felt a little bit sorry. I think that we had so many choices that it's extremely confusing.
I'm so grateful for the choice. Don't get me wrong. I'm so grateful we have the choices. But I think maybe that's what coming into our 40s is about. It's that refining and funneling of all those choices to reflect who you are now as a 40-plus woman. So the 30s was muddling your way through all the choices. How am I going to live? What am I going to do? Who am I? Blah, 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 blah. Then you get to this stage of your life and you start cherry picking what's going to make it into my basket. What am I keeping? What am I booting out? I think that's how I can best express how I feel my life is feeling to me at the moment, that I get to choose the best parts of what I've learned. That's how I would explain it.
That's absolutely beautiful. I love it. I love it so much. I am super grateful, ladies, that you were able to join me in the confessional today and share so much of your hard-won wisdom. We will put up the links, obviously, to your book and to the podcast and everywhere else in our show notes and in our socials. I am extremely grateful that you girls are out there, blazing a trail for younger women coming through. I think it's brilliant what you're doing. You're amazing. Can't wait to read the book. Super.
We can't wait for you to read it either. And all your WB40 community. We can't wait to get some feedback on this. We've been in a silo. We've just got each other, and we don't know what the world is going to think about this.
Well, thank you so much for having us as well. I mean, it is weird being on the other side of the microphone, and I think we just gave you some massive chunks that you're going to have to edit out. I think we need to remember to take a breath so we can actually let people ask us questions.
I love it. I think that you're gorgeous guest because of that. I just love that you, as you say, it is like just sitting out, having a cocktail or a coffee with a friend, and you've been wonderful guests. So thank you so much for being so generous with your answers.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Sandy.
It's been a great conversation.
Been wonderful. All right. Thanks so much, ladies. Looking forward to reading the book. We'll put up all of the information so that our readers and listeners can get their hands on a copy as soon as it lands.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was good fun.
Thanks for listening to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is brought to you by WB40, Women Beyond 40 Magazine. Available now at WB40.com. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to quality podcasts. We're also now available on YouTube. We chat with really interesting women about their hard-won wisdom, but it really helps us if you can subscribe, like, and share the podcast. Thanks so much for your support. Bye for now.